I would say stop being a tolerance machine, that there's alternatives. I would say ask for help, be vulnerable, start asking proper questions and getting some assistance, and find your tribe and find your people, because as GP owners, there's heaps of us and we're all located in one place at Project X. And so you can be efficient and just connect with all of us at once.
All right, welcome back to the Scale My Clinic podcast. I'm really excited today. In the next person in our series of awesome owners, we have the great privilege of having Dr. Nerida McDonald from Walker Street Doctors. Welcome, Nerida.
Good morning. It's my pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Hey, I think the most important thing for people to understand when they're listening in their cars, or maybe they're watching this, is what's the background that you brought to ownership? So maybe tell us, when did you become an owner? And I'm really keen as to what the drivers and motivators were for that at the time.
Well, it was a complete accident, is the short story. And I'd moved to Sydney for a really good anaesthetics training job and realised that I'd realised that my preference was actually for patients to be conscious and upright and perhaps even conversant. And so I left anaesthetics and found my way into general practice. So this was back in 98, and I went for a job in a suburban general practice, and halfway through the interview, the owners, so it was with two owners, and one of the owners said, well, actually, this is actually not quite so much of a job as a third of a practice. And I went, oh, righto, sounds great. Excellent. Fantastic. So then very shortly after that, I was a third of a practice owner, and I think it was in the first week that I ended up with a very big bill on my desk, which was for the service fee. And it wasn't a percentage of what I was earning. It was for a third of the costs of the whole practice. And I
So
thought,
this is kind of meet and get married on the first date, and then the
right,
first invoice arrives shortly after.
all in without knowing it. And then I thought, oh shit, oh dear, what have I done? And so I did what all doctors know how to do, which is to work harder. And so I got myself an overnight job at a private hospital, and I got myself 25 nursing home visits. And I worked pretty bloomin' hard in those days. And really, it was in that first month of practice ownership that I got a hard lesson in probably one of the three biggest lessons in practice, which is you always have to have cash flow, which I had none. You always have to have diversified income streams, which I didn't. And you've actually just got to jolly well ask better questions, don't you? So I was pretty embarrassed because it wasn't that I hadn't asked the right questions. It was just that I hadn't asked any questions, and I wouldn't have had the first idea which question to ask. And
Wow, that's a baptism of fire, right? So essentially what happened was you walked into, this sounds like one of the old partnership models where they were splitting the cost two ways, and the owners have said, you know what, this is rubbish. We really should split them three ways. And somebody said, hey, I think I've found somebody. So while you're in the chair, they said, by the way, you're the other person, except there wasn't really a lot of disclosure around what that involved.
no, sadly, no. And look, that we batted on for 10 years like that. We took on a fourth practice owner as well, and we batted on, and it was a loss-making venture for about a decade, and I was there for 5 more. And it really wasn't until one of my receptionists started nicknaming one of the practice owners Eeyore, and then I looked around and I thought, look at me, I am actually in 100-acre wood, and I'm in business with Winnie the Pooh and Eeyore and Piglet, and I would be Tigger in this equation. And we were just completely misaligned. And for the first decade, I kind of sold it like, well, we moderate each other. He moderates me. We moderate each other. He moderates my enthusiasm. We're good for each other. And until it just sort of, our conversations in the practice ownership meetings would go something along the lines of, well, hey, Eeyore, I never actually called him that to his face, but hey, Eeyore, how about we stop running 2 hours late and stop paying our receptionist 2 hours overtime every single day, and maybe use that money to do up the waiting room? And maybe, how about we get a website? And it was, oh me, oh my. And how about, instead of, when the script requests come in, instead of whinging, bitching, and moaning for 20 minutes, how about we use this new Stocks Online thing when patients pay $15 and we wouldn't have to open so late? And how about that? Oh, that will never work. And on it went. And finally, that went on for years. And I was frustrated, to say the least, angry, pissed off with the world, hated my job. And ultimately, 2011 came. And when you have to take a deep breath before you walk into work, that something's got to give. And I actually sold my quarter of the practice at that point for $1, which,
Right.
in my opinion, was overpriced. It was a money pit, so I got a good deal out of that at $1. And ultimately, then I had absolutely no power. And finally, Piglet got his brave on and told me to piss off, which I did. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because then I was forced to sort of put my money where my mouth was. And I couldn't have made a practice work in that area. There was too much in the way of corporate to the north and bulk billing corporate to the north and private corporate to the south. I couldn't have made that work. So I knew the North Sydney market pretty well. My own GP had retired. She was there and she'd retired. And I knew there was a market for me to move in. At post GFC prices, we picked up a bit of a steal, 101 square metres, 6 floors up in the heart of North Sydney, with a harbour view, actually, until it was built out. And we started, one of the GPs who'd been my registrar followed me. We pinched a receptionist from the old place, and we pinched my GP's practice manager, and off we started. I suppose a greenfields practice, you would call that. Started from zero and then gradually just increased nicely our billings 20% per year. And on we went. Annus horribilis in 2019, which came before COVID. Most people, the COVID years were the shit years, but for us, it had kind of all happened the year before that. And there was this is well before I started to scale my clinic, and there was 3 things that really happened in short succession in that year. The first was that my eldest son got really sick. And so I camped in hospital with him for 10 days. And I took the best part of 6 weeks off work and got myself set up with telehealth, actually. Well, I was FaceTiming patients and keeping the practice running, and I had my printer and my computer, and I was a bit ahead of my time, Todd. I just wasn't getting paid anything for it, but the practice was ticking over. And when I got back to work, finally, there was a clear dichotomy between a GP who was our biggest billing doctor and the rest of us. There was 3 others that were working part-time. And I got back to work and I was as sure as I could possibly be that this person was responsible for the rapid turnover of GPs that we'd had in the previous year. And ultimately, again, when you stand outside your practice, taking a deep breath before you walk over the threshold, there's a problem. In this case, I was citing Man in the Arena, Teddy Roosevelt, and it's not the critic that counts, it's the man in the arena. And it's like, seriously, if you've got to do that, there's a problem, right? So I took action. I sat the person down, and we talked, and I asked him to leave. And it was an extremely unpopular decision, extremely unpopular with everyone. The patients and the doctors just saw they just went, oh my God, another doctor, really? And the practice manager saw the financial hemorrhage, and the nurse was seeing this person as a patient, and the receptionist really liked them. And it was a really heavy burden to carry for a long time, actually for years afterwards. But ultimately, I think it was the right thing to do, because it left us with 4 people walking together, marching to the beat of the same drum, really. So we were finally in alignment. And from there, we did build 6 new doctors, bit by bit by bit, came and stayed, and ultimately helped grow the practice. And while all of that was happening, the developers swooped in on the building. So not just one, but two different developers swooped in on the building. And the building was made up of, there was a multinational that owned several floors, and there was some medium-sized businesses, and then there was a whole bunch of small guys like me. And surprise, surprise, the strata was made up of the big guys mostly, who were representing us and acting in our best interest until it was apparent that they actually might not have been acting in our best interest. Surprise. And there were evening meetings going on, and there were two developers saying two different things to different people. And if you want the recipe about how to implode a building, that's how you do it. That's how you do it. Like, there were fights breaking out in the foyer, and we were up in the boardroom, and men dressed in suits with their arms crossed and their backs literally turned to each other. And the problem for me was that every second man in that room was my patient. And
Right.
the benefit for me was that every second man in that room was my patient. And there was one weekend that, when your kids are little and you go, it's too quiet. What's going? It's just,
Yes.
what are they up to? It is too quiet. So I got that feeling on a weekend, and I called one of the big guys, and he didn't pick up, but I called one of the little guys, and he did pick up, and he goes, so this is how it is. We've got the skinny on the heads of agreement's going to drop on Monday morning. Get ready. They're going after the little guys. And this is the lawyer that a few of us are using, who's all over it. Get ready. And mate, when there's that amount of money involved, you don't have to tell me twice. So I was out there in front of the lawyer's office at some ungodly hour that morning, just waiting for him to walk through the door. And yeah, ultimately we scored big out of that, and we quadrupled our money in a short space of time.
So property investing became the new aspiration. Maybe I should just be in the property game, not in the business.
Yeah, mate, talk about accidentally winning the lottery, essentially. But of course, it's the super fund that wins the lottery. And
You get it
mate,
eventually. True.
and then my thinking being, well, this building's coming down. But that was the information that I had at the time. And so at the end of 2019, we started kind of loosely looking for a new place to move to, because by that time we would have had about 6 doctors by that stage. And then we all know what happened in 2020. And yeah, we continued to grow through those years. We were in a city, and we're supposed to be the first to fall and the hardest to fall. But I think we were as prepared as we could have been. We had a nurse whose family was in Wuhan. So we're kind of getting a blow by blow. And my husband was sort of making policy for RPA Hospital, which is the closest hospital, decent hospital, to Sydney International Airport. And my youngest son was in weekly boarding at that stage. And so we're liaising with the boarding schools in terms of the policy. And so we were really front-footed, and we had cash flow on this occasion. And so we bought whole new video monitors, and we bought our doctors' laptops, and I cleared my schedule at 11 o'clock every day to listen to Terry Chant and Gladys Berejiklian, and it was like, okay, Gladys, what are we doing today? Let's go. What are we doing today? You know how that was. So we did a lot of telehealth, was the bottom line, and actually started offering services to those boarding school families west of the Sandstone Curtain. So we kind of took that opportunity to really broaden our community. Yeah.
Awesome. Hey, I'd love to go back and get a little bit more detail on 2 or 3 things that you talked a bit about. And so one of them was the cautionary tale of three-way partnership, just learning about what didn't work. And one of the things I think that's a problem for all of us as doctors and owners is I fundamentally believe GPs have a very high tolerance level, that we're trained to be really good at taking punches in a sense, in that it's kind of what we do from the federal government. It's kind of what we do from, like, everybody tells us what to do, right? GP should is the start of every kind of advisory piece for us. And so we just get really good at just kind of just accepting whatever people give us. And so I really would like to unpack that a little bit more. The challenges of three-way ownership, how it was that you eventually just said, you know what? And then if you had your time again, what would you do in that environment? And again, I think the thing to say here is this is independent of the people. This is really about just structurally. I'd love to hear a bit about that. And then the other thing I'd love to unpack a little bit is you made some comments around the ecology around the clinic, the sort of things that you thought were important ingredients internally and externally, and go into that as well. But let's go into the partnership. I'm keen to just hear just your thoughts now that you've kind of seen the other side of it, what it can be like. What would you tell that younger version of you, and what were the lessons in there?
I think all of those hard lessons were probably foundational for where I've ended up, to be honest. And I don't regret any of it, really. But I think with a three-way partnership, like I did say to myself for many years, all medical partnerships end in divorce at some stage. Like, I'm not marital divorce, but they all, everyone hates each other at some point. But to be honest, and probably we were moderating each other in the early days, but it was very clear at that point that one person was on the way out, that it took a year to turn on the computer on his desk, and there was still paper files, and I was treating receptionists for all of them in 1 week for rotator cuff injuries, for pulling out those great big fat files, jamming them back in. And we probably were moderating each other initially, but we were really misaligned because I was at the start of my practice and there was no money to be made in that practice. But I could see that there was money to be made in that practice. And I was stuck with people who just, I couldn't force them to come along with me because the old school way was just too entrenched. That the general practices didn't make a profit. That it was just like they were money pits. You just work harder and harder and harder, and you just keep sinking your heart and soul into it for no financial reward. And it's obvious now that there's plenty of financial reward if you play your cards right.
Yep. There'll be people listening to this, Nerida, that are, these structures are still around, of course. They haven't, and they might have the physical structure of partnership. And just for listeners, essentially the way that worked is that you retain your own revenue and you just split the overheads by 2, 3, however many owners there are. They split the overheads those ways. And my observation from talking to a lot of owners in these structures is that the leadership and ownership is extremely passive. Beyond paying the bill and complaining that it's a big bill, there's a personal cost for stepping in to actually lead, manage, hold others accountable. And so nobody does it because what they think is, well, if I do that, I'm not billing. And if I'm not billing, I'm just paying more of the service fees. And so structurally, that doesn't align with good outcomes. Is that what you experienced in that?
And I guess maybe that they couldn't actually see the efficiencies that were there. They were there for the taking. And maybe it's the case of, because we're so siloed as GP owners, that it was just business as usual, that doing something different and finding some efficiencies was not something that they'd ever thought of and didn't think would work. It was just old school is how we keep going forward. And it doesn't have to be like that, of course.
Yeah, and so people listening that are in those structures need to know that there is another way. You can actually re-engineer things. Obviously, getting advice about that is important. And sometimes people are in a modern structure, so a shareholder structure, be it a unit, trust, or a company, and they still have a similar thing, right? Where there are passive owners and there are active owners. What do you advise those people? How do those people kind of address the passivity of one or two of the partners?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, to be honest, Todd. I'm all for benevolent dictatorship, as you know, but I think that we have seen it in our group. There's a notable example who had the maturity that I certainly didn't at the time, which was to actually sit down with a moderator and actually find a solution to that problem. I don't know what the answer is there. My solution was to to bail or to be pushed to be more accurate. But yeah, I now would find that very difficult to get back into a situation like that because I'm pretty strong-willed when it comes to making stuff happen, and don't yeah, I I hate being held back.
Well, once you've been outside of the matrix, you can't go back in, can you? Once you've seen that it can be different, you can't re-enter that. So I think that's important for people to realise. And if somebody's listening and they're in that kind of circumstance where they're finding they're held back by their owners, then what you're saying is you don't have to continue to put up with that. Find a way out. And there are multiple ways of sorting through that. You can moderate, you can mediate, you can have somebody help reach some kind of alignment. But what we're talking about is reaching a point where there is a high degree of alignment and people can kind of have a safe environment where they can share and challenge each other, but it doesn't end up with people going home and kind of cracking the sads, for want of a better word.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a big part of it is if you bat on long enough doing the same old, you've actually got no clue that people actually do things quite differently. Independent owners do things quite differently. It's not a matter of burning out, selling onto a corporate. It's actually that there's plenty of ways to get the job done.
And speaking of corporates, let's go back over the filters that you applied when you were out of the prior clinic. I'm really curious. You touched on a couple of things. You sort of felt that one area wasn't appropriate based on the sort of local competition. I'm really curious as to what kind of internal filters you used to choose the environment to put the clinic in, and then how you chose the internal environment in the clinic to make sure it was different to the one you just left.
Yeah, the corporate to the north was Ed Bateman's flagship store. So there was no competing against that. Did I say flagship store? I'm sorry, I
You
meant
did.
flagship
I know what you meant.
practice.
And it's probably an apt description.
That's bygones. But to the south, there was a bunch of really good practices being bought up by a corporate, and on the face of it, they looked like they were retaining most of their character and authenticity. I think on the inside, it's a bit of a different story from the staff's point of view and from the patient's point of view. But yeah, look, I had known the North Sydney market very well. It's very close to my home. To be honest, I Amanda McBride's practice. I don't know if you were ever aware of Amanda McBride's practice, but her practice had this amazing reputation in North Sydney. This was an extremely quality group practice that charged what they were worth right from the get-go, and they had this amazing reputation. And then of course she got sick and ultimately she died, but her practice was dwindling, fragmenting, crumbling, really. And with my GP having retired through illness and hers kind of crumbling, there was room for me. And yeah, because that was the ultimate aim, was to build a practice that provided excellent, well, that replaced Amanda's practice, to be honest. That was really quality practice for the surrounding area, that gave an alternative to the bulk billing job down the road.
It's nice when you see, when you've been able to see and hear and touch something, to kind of have a really tangible concept of what the North Star is. I think that's really useful that you had that, because a lot of people don't have that luxury. They haven't actually consumed or been a patient in or seen the thing that they want to build. And so I think that's really lovely that you're able to witness it and say, yeah, that's it. That's the thing that I want. And just on a self-scoring basis, do you think you've exceeded the yardstick that you kind of mentally set for yourself there?
Yeah, I do, actually. I do. And again, it comes down to being exposed to what other people are doing all around the country from the inside, like from the nuts and bolts, and to create a future-proofed practice that is excellent in every encounter. And the subject matter can be shit, like it can be cancer, right? But the experience can still be extremely good quality, exceptional. To create that, there are 1,000 different parts to that, and all of them fit together to create that experience. So you don't really know what they are until you're kind of really exposed to them from the inside, like what other people are doing. You're obviously, we get together on a Wednesday morning for a couple of hours and then have breakout rooms and have teaching and all that stuff, because you and such are the foundation of all wisdom, of course. But actually behind the scenes, I don't know, behind the scenes, we actually, I mean, there wouldn't be a week that goes past that I'm not DMing somebody or having a conversation or sharing a glass of champagne with somebody or something, where we're talking about stuff. What's your intranet like? What do you do with allied health? How do you charge a rental? Do you charge a service fee? Those backup batteries for your vaccine fridge, how's that going down? How much do they cost? Is it worth it? Blah, blah, blah. On and on it goes. And everybody's got a little bit of experience, or a lot of experience as the case may be, in all of those 1,000 different components that makes it excellence.
Yes, I think you're probably the person in Project X in Scummer Clinic that has the most photos with other owners around Australia.
Yeah, I think medicine is something that consumes your whole life. And honestly, my friendship group is very small until I found this group. And so these are really like-minded people. And yeah, we have a fat time together whenever in Perth or Canberra or Brisbane or whatever.
And there it is, how to make travel tax deductible. Come to just direct messaging for advice.
How to make travel fun, at least. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, let's bring it back to, I'd love to now come back to just the beginnings of practice you owned yourself. And so we got to the part where you took a place in the building. That building was sold. There was a nice little return. But then you're kind of left in this dead space of, okay, there's no future in this particular building. You don't know exactly when that ends. And then at some point in time, you kind of thought, okay, we need to move forward here. Maybe let's talk a little bit about that kind of state of suspended animation where you kind of weren't sure which way to go and what you were evaluating in that state.
Well, it was the end of 22 at that stage. So we were a 13 can. We had a 4 doctor practice and we were 9 doctors at that point. So to the point where we had adopted telehealth so much that we sometimes had 3 doctors working from home via telehealth and 4 in the surgery. So, and a maternity leave, somebody told me told the practice they were taking maternity leave, and next thing, like in my office, 3 doctors are on me going, "Can I have that day? Can I have that day? Can I have that?" I thought, okay, that's never happened before. I think I need to do something about this. And so it was at the end of right at the end of 22, and a lot of people were coming back into the city by that stage, and were demanding in-person rather than telehealth appointments. And we were preparing for accreditation, which causes me apoplexy every time it comes around. You'd think after the 9th time I'd just be really cool, calm and collected about it, but I wasn't. And right at that time, my practice manager told me that she was retiring. And she's entitled to. She was 68 at the time. She's probably time, but that just left me with a 9 doctor practice and a few receptionists and a nurse, completely alone. And I thought, well, we have to move. I mean, she encouraged me to retire. And I thought, well, look, I probably could. I wouldn't have any idea what I'd do with myself. I'm not a lie on the beach reading books. I mean, I can lie on a beach reading a book, but not for the rest of my life. And I thought, I got 2 options here. I can move to something bigger, which is an effort by yourself, or I can close things down and fragment the whole place. And I just thought, I just do not have that in me. Putting 9 doctors out of a job, plus all the receptionists, plus the nurse, plus the thousands of patients that just would be left with the place down the road. I just couldn't bring myself to do that. And so I knew where to come to ask for help, because I'd heard your podcast, hadn't I? And
We've come full circle.
because I'd heard your podcast. It was actually some years after the sacking your biggest billing doctor scenario. and I was out gardening. I garden when I listen to podcasts, and I heard you say, and you'll know you're alive as a practice owner when you have to sack your biggest billing doctor. And I literally was out the back shouting at the lime tree, "Oh my God, he gets it. See, that guy, he gets it. Like that guy gets it. Oh my God." And I've learnt since that there are other people who have actually sacked their biggest billing doctor, but it was such a heavy load that I'd carried. And so when the end of 22 came around, it was obvious that the help that I needed was to have a coach, really, which and that's what I thought I was getting as a coach when I signed up. But the first the first planning session I had was with Sarah Borman, and like by that stage I'd been a practice owner for 25 years, and I sat
Right.
with her and I told her my story, like literally just for a few minutes, and she goes, "Right, well, what you need, obviously, you've gone from a small to a medium-sized practice, but you don't have an organisation structure, do you? So, like, that's obvious." And then, well, she didn't quite say it like that, but
That's what you heard.
if your practice manager's going into semi-retirement and doesn't have it to move to a bigger place, well, get yourself a project manager. And again, she didn't quite say it like that, but that's what I heard. And I thought, and I literally got off that call and just went, "Oh my God, how did she do that? Like how, like, like I've been doing this a long time. How did she do that?" And literally I just sat there in suspended animation for quite some time after that call, thinking, like, it's obvious that that's what I have to do. Um, and yeah, and it went onwards and upwards from there, and bit by bit by bit I enacted those things. I got myself an organisation structure, and rather than having having a practice manager in suspended animation and semi-retirement doing the kind of mediocre things, I asked her to step up and do more things, and ultimately she stepped down,
Mhm.
and that was in the March afterwards. And I thought, "Oh, bugger." Now I'm really alone. But I was part of Scale My Clinic Project X by that stage, and I mean the first thing I did was reach out for help. I sent off an email to say, "Look, I've fallen through the cracks here, and I really need help," and they provided it. But also, I was pretty tearful after that meeting because we'd known each other for 30 years. She'd been my GP's practice manager for 20 and mine for 10. So we had to kind of finish that relationship in a really amicable way. And I was quite tearful. I think we both were. And then Kate, one of my GPs, walks literally straight into my office after that meeting, and she like, Kate never comes to my office for anything that's trivial. Anyway, she came to my office, she looked at my face and she went, "Oh, are you okay?" I went, "Well, no, this has happened." She goes, "Oh, well, it just so happens that I've got this school friend who's left the AMA and I reckon she'd be interested." Like, it was just, you couldn't credit it. You couldn't make that up. And Jess and I met that weekend, and yeah, Jess is the best of the best. So it's the darkest right before the dawn, isn't it?
That's what they say, and I'd like to just pause for a little moment on the kind of, so this is a common thing I think that we find, that the practices of kind of they've been managed and led to the standards that people kind of know to be reasonable until they see other standards, and then it becomes, actually, gee, I need to do a bit of work here. And you made a decision that rather than go light and kind of, this is not unusual, people get towards the end of their role or their career and they kind of want to ease back a little bit. This is not being critical of people, but rather this is pretty well human nature. And so at that point in time, you could have said, "Oh, look, I'll let them write it out and decide when they're done." And I've heard people do that. Sometimes this is 2, 3, 4, 5 years, even longer. And there's kind of, they're committing to passivity. But what you did instead was say, actually, you know what? We need to get ready for the next stage. And so it's going to involve an increase in the work, but also the standards that we tolerate are going to be higher than what they were. I'm really curious as to how you came to that. Like, what was the thinking? Because there must have been a lot of, I'm assuming there was internal debate about what was the right course here.
Oh, completely. Completely. It would have been so much easier just to peter out. Absolutely. And remember that, like, I had no organization structure in place. I was on that hamster wheel. I couldn't have run any faster on that hamster wheel.
Yeah, right.
And after that accreditation, which was the real trigger, I just thought, fuck, I can't cope with this practice. How am I going to cope with something bigger than this? But I have to, because I have to do it for my people. Um, so it was a case of I just couldn't bring myself to think about the alternative to let everybody down. So I moved forwards, but I needed the help to do it.
I think this is a really important thing for us to just pause and everybody just do a little bit of thinking about. One of the sayings someone really smart said to me, you can't grow into pain. So as you rightly said, if you think it's bad now, and so one question we'll sometimes ask people is, how would it be if you doubled everything? And a lot of people say, yeah, I'd like a business double the size. You're like, really? Do you want double the hassle, double the pain, double the stress? And most people are saying, no, I want this, but I don't want this. And so the reality is it often requires a restructure of our own internal thinking about what's reasonable. And so making that decision at the time is bold because the reality is you don't know what's on the other side of that decision. It's really easy now to think, oh, that was the right decision. But you, at the time, of course, you don't know that. And so at the time would be weighing a lot of things up. So could we spend a little bit of time on that? What were the things in your head that you thought, shit, maybe this happens instead of what I hoped?
Yeah. Well, look, the sticking point really was we really did nothing during COVID in terms of looking for another place. It really sort of put everything on pause because nobody wanted any more change during those years. And we could cope with a small physical size practice because we were doing so much telehealth. But loosely, I had been looking for a new place to move to. And I knew that to make it worthwhile, it had to at least be double the size. Like we were looking for 200 to 250, ended up actually with 267. I couldn't cope with the commercial real estate agents in North Sydney. It was just, I just couldn't cope. Like they would just take me into buildings that you just go, mate, you see that pass card that you need to get up there? How's that actually going to work with patients? And you see that toilet that's behind the fire door? How's that actually, mate? Just have a think about it. Like, have you ever been to a general practice before? And it was just too frustrating. So I ended up actually getting a real estate broker to help me. There was a significant cost involved. And in fact, in 2019, I'd almost got to sign the dotted line with them and looped back 3 years later, and it was worth every single penny because we were doubling half our size, but we were tripling our rent. And I just thought, this is a problem for me and the person who takes over this practice eventually if I get this wrong. So I was glad that I'd spent the money on a broker who really got me a deal that I just couldn't have imagined was possible. A 10-year lease and a couple of 5-year options.
That's awesome. I think the other thing for people to keep in mind, doctors, I think, are terrible for the DIY mentality and thinking that they don't want to pay experts. But what you purchased back was your sanity. You recognised that if you had to hang out for another hour or two with these people, you're going to probably punch one of them. So it was better for everybody that you didn't do it. And then you could just reallocate that time to higher value activities, right? So that's the other part. There's a lot going on with moving. And so let's talk about that. So you evaluated multiple locations. I think even though you outsourced the work in terms of the lease, you had a lot of input into negotiating the lease. And so I'd love people to get an idea about just exactly what you were able to create, because one of the problems with experience is you don't get a chance to do that many things enough times to become really proficient in them. And that becomes an issue in that you can be taken to the cleaners very easily. So I'd love you to talk about where did you begin and where did you end with all of the negotiations around the location. It doesn't have to be the exact dollars, but just for the quantum of change that was made.
Well, yeah, so I engaged the broker and they got a number of places, and I had actually seen a couple of places and was very interested in one in particular, which actually fell through because it was a Southeast Asian owner who'd been through avian flu and so on, and COVID and stuff, and they didn't want us bringing leprosy into the practice, into the
Okay.
building, which was very
Right.
sad. But then actually the broker got me the place where we currently, and he said, what about this place? And literally after 3 years, like I knew it was the right place. My heart rate just went from 60 to 160 in about 2 seconds flat. And I just thought, oh my God, that's it. That's the one. And I said, but it's too expensive. And the broker got me an incentive, which was pretty awesome. But his brief to me was, he goes, you doctors, you go into these negotiations and you try and make common ground and you smile and you try and make friends and you try and work out who are you try and be nice to people. Don't do that. Can you please walk in when you're looking at the place and just imagine that somebody's made a bad smell here before you came in? And so I did. And that's and to the point where the architect goes, do you really hate this place? And I went, I love it. But and then so we were able to sort of get a decent deal because somebody had made a bad smell there before. And then of course it still was it was still triple the rent that we currently had. So how do you offset that is the question. And like we said before, one of the biggest lessons is diversification of income streams. And it can't just be service fees and treatment room fees, that there's probably something else. And I had been using a pathology company for 25 years without making a single cent from them. And I didn't even really cross my mind until that 250K treasure hunt that we did. And I thought, well, I don't have room for pathology. And it slowly dawned on me that actually this is what I need to be doing to offset some of those rental costs. And to be honest, before that time, I was known to be one of those people who walked past all the people sitting at the coffee shop outside our practice, and I go, "Oh, what do you do for a living? Like seriously, what do you do for a living?" And then I became one of those people. I gave myself permission to be one of those people sitting outside being over caffeinated and doing deals. It lit me up, actually. That was yeah, I felt very alive in August of that year for sure. Yeah.
I think one thing that, so this is a personal belief of mine. I think that business is a really important personal development tool, because you can be sure that any of your weaknesses in character will be magnified by owning a business, and the other side as well. It is an opportunity to engage in almost like competitive sport, that kind of arena. And so it's really exciting from the other side to see people lit up by this. And there are a lot of people like this in Project X, right? You've got Emily, Kristen, Kylie. There's a lot of people that are mostly women that are killer business women. They just enjoy the business element of the work that we do, which means negotiation. And so well done on making sure that all of those worked.
Well, I forgot the most important bit, of course, which was that I hadn't received a cent in 25 years. And then I went to being over caffeinated. There was a kind of a bit in the middle, which was that I did my homework, and I had webinars on loop. I was literally walking around the suburb doing my shopping with those webinars on how to do that on loop. And there were books that I read a couple of times before going into that negotiation, that there was some serious homework to be done to go from zero to what was a pretty good deal in the end. There was some serious homework to be done, and I wouldn't have, obviously, where I got all that learning from.
I do. And I think the thing, again, for people listening, I think it's really important to say when you are negotiating subleases, be it pathology, allied health, non-GP specialists, radiology, there's a red book that applies for radiology and pathology, and all of those rules are adhered to and applied, and it's a structured, tendered process. And in the end, what came out of this is, maybe let's talk about the clinic. I think your vision for the clinic, and then how it actually turned out. It'd be worthwhile giving a bit of a plug for your favourite architect and designer for that practice too.
Yeah, well, I guess my brief to him, and he was there right from the get-go, by the way,
I
at that
saw
first.
the unhappy face, and
So,
so thought, my God, I'm not getting this deal.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, because of course he did our first one as well,
Right.
in 2012. So, and he sends me a Christmas text every year. And so waiting for the next practice to happen, I think. But he was there right from the get-go. And look, my brief to him was, I really want the wow factor. And I would say to him, is having an above desk sink too bougie? And he'd go, no, not bougie enough. That's as Khan from Accord Projects. And look, I think we learnt from each other. I mean, I was absolutely insistent that I wanted doctor closest to door design. I was absolutely insistent that I don't need a big waiting room, that we have small waiting times. So everybody's sort of a little bit different in that regard. The only reason I want a decent sized waiting room is to have the capacity for lectures, to public lectures and things to happen. So, so I wanted the wow factor, because my thinking at that time was that if we had an amazing team of doctors, we had a pretty good central location, we had what I thought was a reasonably well run practice. And I thought, well, if we've also got the wow factor in our fit out, then that will make recruitment easier and this will help me future proof the practice. Yeah, that was the theory, which but we get stuck on stuff, don't we, later on?
It wouldn't be business if there wasn't a challenge. And I think, so this brings us to a good bit, I think, Nerida, because the reality is that the work involved in creating something valuable, it's high. And I personally love that, because I think what it does is it creates a moat around really beautiful things, businesses, whatever that might be, artwork, it doesn't really matter. But the work involved in doing something creates a moat, because I'll be blunt here. Too many people talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. They are not prepared to do the work that's involved in making something great. And so you'd expect to still be facing problems, and that's normal. They're just generally at a different level. And so maybe let's talk a bit about the satisfaction that comes from solving some of those problems, because, as you said, there are some things that still remain to be solved. But talk about just the sense of pride and everything else that comes from shifting from one clinic to another, actually standing back and saying, you know what, this place is pretty fucking cool. This is my dream. Talk about that. Like, what was that like?
It's pretty fucking cool. I mean, it is. Let's be honest. People, because we opened in the week before Christmas of 2023. And we were doing the final touches, and I would sort of sit at the reception desk checking off results and stuff on my laptop before we opened, and people would walk past, and then they'd stop and they'd come back and they'd take another look. And the day that we opened, in the week that we opened, everyone just went, wow. Like I just heard wow so many times from patients. And even still, like there are still patients that 16 months later, some people you don't see for 16 months. And so it's the first time that they've come in, or you've done a telehealth with them. It's the first time they come in and they go, wow, and so I still go, yeah, like this is pretty fucking cool. And so yeah, it's really good. And what happened was that with our original 9 doctors, so we took on a 10th, and with our original 9 doctors, I said, this is one was on maternity leave. So this is your opportunity to just ooze into your space. There's 8 rooms, 8 doctors, ooze into that space. And I don't care if you take half sessions, that's perfectly fine for the moment. We'll talk about that later down the track. And everyone just sort of picked up a bit more extra work, and everyone's really happy. We've got a tea room even in this place, and pathology, and it's very fancy. Yeah, everyone's very happy to be there. We've got a rainforest soundscape, and we've got a scentscape, and it's all terribly bougie, darling, but it's pretty cool. Yeah, it's very
I
cool.
love this. And so let's talk a little bit more about the internal effects on the team of being a bit more engaged, aligned, installing an accountability or organizational structure. What have all of those things done since that kind of first conversation with Sarah? She said, all right, you need to install this, this, and this. Well, what's changed from how it feels for you in the business?
It's unbelievably refreshing and relieving just to be able to share that load. And the buck still stops with me, but to have a practice manager who's really engaged in the practice, and Jess works 3 days a week. But she's absolutely engaged in the practice. We have a team leader now as well. So her 2IC who trains new receptionists and does a lot of the payroll and bookkeeping and stuff, who happens to be my son as well.
Awesome.
He's a music composer, so this is his kind of real job. And also we have a clinical lead as well. And so she helps to oversee the treatment room. And also she helps to have sort of one-on-one conversations with doctors just to make sure that we're meeting their needs, and we're doing the occasional clinical audit and stuff like that. So she does quite a bit of, she's my 2IC, I guess. And that all came about in part because I'm planning ahead, the next decade ahead. I want a succession plan in place. In actual fact, the valuation of the practice was enough to scare anyone away, to be honest, which is kind of a good thing, but kind of a bad thing. And so, but regardless of all of that, we've come to some agreements in terms of succession planning, but also that organisation structure is what we need. Yeah. And it's sharing the love.
I think that's a nice problem to have, a practice valuation that's on the scary side. And I guess that answers the question that people might have thought, because it's easy to invest money in a practice. So to be blunt, anybody can sign a lease. And I have a vivid memory of a young doctor coming up to me and saying, hey, I'm about to take on a property. It's really close to one of your clinics, and so I don't want to talk to you too much about it. I remember saying to him, look, I'm happy to give you advice. It's not going to be biased. It's really just about what's right for you. Anyway, he did go ahead and do this. And then the practice had to be sold not long afterwards because he'd overcommitted. So he just said yes to something that didn't make sense. At a point in time, the practice was sold as a distressed sale, and it continues to function, but relatively poorly. And so it's relatively easy to say yes to something. The thing that people listening and watching might be thinking is, how much better did it work out for you? Now, again, I don't know if you had a business valuation prior to moving or not. What do you anticipate is the increase in value, not in necessarily in dollar terms, but like 2-3 times? How much would the asset, the business asset, be worth compared to what it was prior to the move?
Well, your asset's worth nothing if there's no future to it. And if a wrecking ball is going to come through at some undetermined time in the future, you've got nothing. And so, what's the multiplier? Oh, about $2 million. About
Like,
2 million is the multiplier. It's, yeah, you've got nothing if you've got no future. There has to be some longevity in it. Otherwise, you've got nothing. And so the 10-year lease plus 2 5-year options is a big commitment, but there's future in that. What that just means is that you've got to have structures in place in the hit by bus scenario, or my husband cheerfully tells me that we're at a viable, diable age. So you've got to have stuff in place just in case things happen like that, which they are. We've got all those documents in place now.
well, I think the other thing is too that the biggest thing you can do for the longevity of the business is to have a profitable business. And as you said, creating that value, I'm going to say out of thin air. It's not actually out of thin air because you already had kind of the raw ingredients. So making a great business is a little bit like having a recipe, and you've got some of the ingredients, but not all of the ingredients, and you're just not quite sure of the ratios. So sometimes it's a little bit like having an advisor that says, okay, I've cooked this 10 times before, and usually these ratios are kind of about right. For where you are now, where do you feel you are on the progress meter? If we were giving you a score out of 10 with the progress you've made to what you envisaged going back a few years, how far along the spectrum are you towards 10 out of 10? Like, this is exactly what I want it to be.
this is 11 out of 10. This is off the, like, who would have known that it was even possible to get set up like this? Like I was really quite distressed when I started Project X, and to have come this far is just, it's completely off the scale. Like, it's completely off the scale. I had no idea that it was possible. I had no idea that it was possible to have created such a firm financial foundation to my practice, and to have set it up so well that it doesn't matter what happens to me down the track, that this is the legacy. This has got a future to it, with or without me. And I prefer that it was with me, actually, but because I'm having a bit of fun mostly. But yeah, it's really, it's couldn't have imagined it, Todd. Couldn't have imagined it.
I think I had a wise person tell me you're always selling your business to either your future self or somebody else. And so I think that's actually a really useful mindset. And then the other thing that I've had from smart people is that you can retire from, you don't have to retire from something in its entirety. You might retire from certain jobs along the way. And so do you have something that you think, you know what, I'm going to retire from these jobs within the practice? Do you have a mind that there are things that you would prefer not to be doing in the next sort of 12, 18 months?
I think I've already retired from the ones I don't want, actually. So I still really quite like consulting most of the time, and so I consult sort of 16 to 20 hours a week. That's all, and occasionally step up in school holidays and stuff. But the other half of my week is dedicated to doing the things that I do like to do, which is upskilling leadership and thinking about recruitment and networking and thinking about the big picture stuff, that's not just about my practice but actually about the future of general practice in Australia and what that looks like. And thank goodness we're the country that people want to come to at the moment, because it could be the other way around. And so let's just keep that up. So just those sort of big picture questions is where I like to spend my time. A little bit of social media posting, which is I didn't have a Facebook account until I think the end of 2023, so it's been a steep upward learning curve there. But yeah, just the interesting stuff now, the stuff that's at the, I guess, the higher pay grade is what I do.
And the things that only you can do. So I think that's a really important thing for anybody listening or watching this, is to understand that there's a framework to delegate the things that can be done by others. You've done that exceptionally well. One of the things I'd love to touch on is your interest in nominating for awards. And so you are a multi-award winning practice, which is really cool. I'm really curious about what's behind that, who drives it internally, and maybe talk a little bit about what you've won and what that's meant to you.
Well, we won the 2023 RACGP New South Wales and ACT Practice of the Year, which was very cool. Actually, that was just a little bit of fun, because the application, because look, honestly, that was a bit of fun, that first one. And literally I put a pair of sunglasses on at the front of the practice, and because I was just sick of the whinging and bitching about general practice, about how bad everything was. And I thought, do you know what? Actually, things are pretty good here. Things could be a lot worse. And so I put my sunnies on and I went, the future is looking really bright. Blah, 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 blah. And literally just pretended I was on the stage. And lo and behold, we won the award. And honestly, our practice is pretty cool. And I think our practice deserved that, because we've got amazing GPs in the practice. But not to say that there's a million other great practices out there, of course. But it was our turn.
Just not as many. They just didn't win the prize, basically. So they might be good, but not quite as good.
They just didn't have the video that I had. They just didn't have the sunglasses. Anyway, so then we were on a bit of a roll, and I just saw the local small business awards dotted. I just started to notice them at different businesses, like the bakery and I thought, oh, that's cool advertising. we just moved, we need to grow.
Yeah.
Let's have a crack at that. And actually, that is a really helpful thing to do for any small business owner, because it's not about just putting your hand up. For those small business awards, there was 12 essays that you have to write about different aspects of the practice. And it's actually really onerous. And it was a couple of days' work. And I personally found it extremely valuable to go through that process, because it really got you thinking not only about how far you'd come, but how far there was to go, and future planning as well. So I did enter a few of those last year, because it was really helpful for me as a business owner. And lo and behold, yeah, we got to rock up and wear high heels, and we won a couple of them. Yeah.
That's awesome. And I think you and I had a brief chat about this at the start, but general practice, in terms of general practitioners owning clinics, is in a bit of trouble. Going back 6 years, about 25% of GPs were interested in practice ownership. It's now down to 10%, 1 in 10. And so just showcasing what we do and highlighting how much fun it can be, I think is super important in this. Now, when you get out of the practice, Nerida, you mentioned the gardening, and I think growing vegetables and running are your two passions outside of that. Talk to us a little bit about the part that those two things have in your life, and then we'll bring it back to general practice in the end.
Yeah, I sort of missed the bit between anaesthetics and general practice. I actually left medicine briefly to do a certificate in horticulture, and was prepared to leave medicine, but found general practice, and I'm glad I did. And so yeah, got myself a veggie pod to keep the pests away, and I've got my lime tree, as I said, and the eggplants have been just amazing this season. So yeah, I quite like pottering in the garden, and usually listen to podcasts while I'm doing so. Um, and the running thing, well, to be honest, I'm a natural swimmer rather than runner, but running is, I think North Sydney Pool is going to be renovated for the next like 20 years or something. Like, it's just, mate, it just will never be finished. So I run because it's an efficient way to exercise at the start of the day, and because I'm all about efficiency. That efficiency is my middle name, and gets me the endorphins that I need to get through the day. And you don't want to know me if I haven't been for my run in the morning, because I'm a much nicer person when I've been for a run. Much nicer. Yeah.
You and Sarah Borman are cut from the same cloth. You're like, yep, why do you run? Well, because walking takes too bloody long. That's right.
Pretty much.
I could do it in this time. Why wouldn't I? And what I'd love to do is get you to just think about some advice you would give your younger self. What are the things that you think are important for you to know? And let's go back in our time machine to 1998, around the time that you kind of made the decision to get into practice ownership. When in fact, maybe you didn't necessarily make that decision. Maybe someone else made it for you. But around about that sort of time, when you're really early on in your career, what wisdom would you impart to that younger version of you?
I would say, ask better questions for a start. Ask any questions, actually. I would say, stop being a tolerance machine, that there's alternatives. I would say, ask for help, get help, be vulnerable, start asking proper questions, and getting some assistance, and find your tribe and find your people, because as GP owners, there's heaps of us, and we're all located in one place at Project X. And so you can be efficient and just connect with all of us at once. Yeah. Well, all the good ones,
All a
all the
good one.
best ones. Yeah.
I think that's probably a really timely place and way to end today's session. I'm really grateful for you coming full circle, listening to a podcast, coming on a podcast. Maybe we'll get you back again so we can keep that loop going. Really appreciate your contribution, Nerida, to your local community, to your employees, the GPs there, and also more broadly through engaging in the competitions and just leading other young doctors in both in general practice and in ownership. I'm grateful for your contribution to the community. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you very much, Todd. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.